Top authors, current articles are on this channel. The GOP is sick. It didn't start with Trump, and won't end with him. It began where it ended, on the west front of the United States Capitol. On January 6, 2021, an armed mob invited and incited by President Donald Trump smashed barriers, overpowered police, and stormed the Capitol. The insurrectionists scaled the scaffolding erected for President-elect Joe Biden's inauguration and proceeded to sack the seat of government for the first time since the War of 1812. Called to Vasington v. Trump, who promised a wild time, and sent to the Capitol with instructions to fight like hell, the mob halted Congress certification of Biden's victory, sending lawmakers and staff fleeing for their lives. At least 7 people died in the riot or its aftermath, and more than 140 police officers were hurt. Some 845 insurrectionists, several with ties to white supremacist or violent extremist groups, have faced charges, including seditious conspiracy. Many Americans were shocked that Trump, after first considering a plan to seize voting machines, had orchestrated an attempted coup, knowingly dispatching armed attackers to Capitol Hill and then refusing for 187 minutes to call off the assault. And many Americans have been shocked anew to see elected Republicans, after initially condemning Trump's attack on democracy, excuse his actions and rationalize the violent insurrection itself as legitimate political discourse. But a sober look at history might have lessened the shock, for the seeds of sedition had been planted earlier, a quarter-century earlier, in that same spot on the west front of the Capitol. On September 27, 1994, more than 300 Republican members of Congress and congressional candidates gathered where the insurrectionists would one day mount the scaffolding. On that sunny morning, they assembled for a nonviolent transfer of power. Bob Michel, the unfailingly genial leader of the House Republican minority for the previous 14 years, had ushered Ronald Reagan's agenda through the House. But he was being forced into retirement by a rising bomb thrower who threatened to oust Michel as GOP leader if he didn't quit. "My friends," a wistful Michel told the gathering, "I'll not be able to be with you when you enter that promised land of having that long-sought-after majority." Newt Gingrich had almost nothing in common with the man he shoved aside. Michel was a portrait of civility and decency, a World War II combat veteran who knew that his political opponents were not his enemies and that politics was the art of compromise. Gingrich, by contrast, rose to prominence by forcing the resignation of a Democratic Speaker of the House on what began as mostly false allegations, by smearing another Democratic Speaker with personal innuendo, and by routinely thwarting Michael's attempts to negotiate with Democrats. Gingrich had avoided service in Vietnam and regarded Democrats as the enemy, impugning their patriotism and otherwise savaging them nightly on the House floor for the benefit of C-SPAN viewers. Newt. 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 The candidates and lawmakers chanted. A pudgy 51-year-old with a helmet of gray hair approached the lectern. "The fact is that America is in trouble," Gingrich declared. "It is impossible to maintain American civilization with 12-year-olds having babies, 15-year-olds killing each other, 17-year-olds dying of AIDS and 18-year-olds getting diplomas they can't even read." The pejoratives piled up in Gingrich's shouted, finger-wagging harangue, collapsing. Failed so totally. Worried about their jobs. Worried about their safety. Trust broke down. Out of touch. Wasteful. Dumb. Ineffective. Out of balance. Malaise. Drug dealers. Pimps. Prostitution. Crime. Barbarism. Devastation. Human tragedy. Chaos and poverty. Recognize that if America fails, our children will live on a dark and bloody planet, Gingrich told them. Somewhere in this catalog of catastrophe, Gingrich signed the contract with America, a 10-point agenda proposing a balanced budget amendment, congressional term limits and other reforms. "We have become in danger of losing our own civilization," Gingrich warned. Americans had seldom heard a politician talk this way, and certainly not a Speaker of the House. But that's what Gingrich became after the GOP's landslide victory in the 1994 election. The contract with America made little headway, only 3 minor provisions, paperwork reduction, became law, but the rise of Gingrich and his shock troops set the nation on a course toward the ruinous politics of today. Much has been made of the ensuing polarization in our politics, and it's true that moderates are a vanishing breed. But the problem isn't primarily polarization. The problem is that one of our 2 major political parties has ceased good faith participation in the democratic process. Of course, there are instances of violence, disinformation, racism, and corruption among Democrats and the political left, but the scale isn't at all comparable. Only one party fomented a bloody insurrection and even after that voted in large numbers, 139 House Republicans, a 2/3 majority, to overturn the will of the voters in the 2020 election. Only one party promotes a web of conspiracy theories in place of facts. Only one party is trying to restrict voting and discredit elections. Only one party is stoking fear of minorities and immigrants. Admittedly, I'm partisan, not for Democrats but for Democrats. Republicans have become an authoritarian faction fighting democracy, and there's a perfectly logical reason for this: democracy is working against Republicans. In the 8 presidential contests since 1988, the GOP candidate has won a majority of the popular vote only once, in 2004. As the United States approaches majority-minority status, the white population, 76% of the country in 1990, is now 58% and will drop below 50% around 2045. Republicans have become the voice of white people, particularly those without college degrees, who fear the loss of their way of life in a multicultural America. White grievance and white fear drive Republican identity more than any other factor, and in turn drive the tribalism and dysfunction in the U.S. political system. Other factors sped the party's turn toward nihilism. Concurrent with the rise of Gingrich was the ascent of conservative talk radio, followed by the triumph of Fox News, followed by the advent of social media. Combined, they created a media environment that allows Republican politicians and their voters to seal themselves in an echo chamber of alternative facts. Globally, south-to-north migration has ignited nationalist movements around the world and created a new era of autocrats. The disappearance of the greatest generation, tempered by war, brought to power a new generation of culture warriors. But the biggest cause is race. The parties resorted themselves after the epochal changes of the 1960s, which expanded civil rights, voting rights, and immigration. Richard Nixon's Southern strategy began an appeal to white voters alienated by racial progress, and, in the years that followed, a new generation of Republicans took that racist undertone and made it the melody. It is crucial to understand that Donald Trump didn't create this noxious environment. He isn't some hideous, orange Venus emerging from the half-shell. Rather, he is a brilliant opportunist. He saw the direction the Republican Party was taking and the appetites it was stoking. The one-time pro-choice advocate of universal health care reinvented himself to give Republicans what they wanted. Because Trump is merely a reflection of the sickness in the GOP, the problem won't go away when he does. Republicans and their allied donors, media outlets, interest groups, and fellow travelers have been yanking on the threads of democracy in civil society for the past quarter century. That's a long time, and the unraveling is considerable. You can measure it in the triumph of lies and disinformation, in the mainstreaming of racism and white supremacy, in the erosion of institutions and norms of government, and in the dehumanizing of opponents and stoking of violence. In the process, Republicans became destructionists. They destroyed truth, they destroyed decency, they destroyed patriotism, they destroyed national unity, they destroyed racial progress, they destroyed their own party, and they are well on their way to destroying the world's oldest democracy. Against that quarter century of ruin, what we are living through today is just a continuation of the GOP's direction for the past 30 years, the appeals to white nationalism, the sabotage of the functions of government, the routine embrace of disinformation, stoking the fiction of election fraud and the big lie, and the steady degradation of democracy. Now, it seems, that degradation is accelerating. We see this in the determined efforts by Republican leaders to ignore, or discredit, the truths being revealed by the House January 6 Select Committee, Trump demanding magnetometers be removed on January 6 so his armed supporters could attend his rally and then march on the Capitol, Trump ignoring pleas from aides and family members to intervene on January 6 to stop the bloodshed, Trump seriously entertaining the seizing of voting machines and attempting to install new leaders at the Justice Department who would support his false fraud claims, and Trump's allegedly still active attempts to tamper with witnesses before the committee. As they avert their gaze from the cascading horrors of the failed coup, Republicans are instead looking to a familiar guide, Gingrich. The former speaker, now a board member of the pro-Trump America First Policy Institute, announced this year that he is serving as a consultant to House GOP leader Kevin McCarthy and his team. No sooner had this been disclosed than Gingrich, on Fox News, threatened the imprisonment of lawmakers serving on the January 6 committee, saying they're going to face a real risk of jail after Republicans take over Congress. Throwing political opponents in jail for investigating an attack on the U.S. Capitol and a coup against the U.S. government? Replied Wyoming Representative Liz Cheney, one of two Republicans on the committee, this is what it looks like when the rule of law unravels. But Gingrich knows that. He's the one who first started tugging at the threads.